Hello and welcome to the Nitty Gritty Writing Podcast. I'm Simon Canton.
And I'm Dave Higgins.
And this week we're going to be talking about when it's okay not to write. But before we do that, we'll do our usual weekly roundup. And Dave, you can go first.
Right. Finished Seven Stones. Last episode went up last Saturday. So that's done apart from the compilations.
Yeah, I was going to say congratulations on that. That's awesome.
When I started the project, I was thinking 6 months, maybe a year. It's been sort of fudging a little bit for the fact I took breaks for holidays. 2 years now.
Wow.
So, but that was a little bit longer than I expected. But I still had sort of people who'd come in at the start and read right the way along and were still thinking it was great on the final episode. So that 97 episodes and people still liked it. So I think the effort was worth it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And obviously there's a certain amount of practice in that. That's a couple of years of cranking every week, which is why when I came out of it, I was thinking, well, there's a topic. When's it okay not to write? Because I've had this itchy. Okay, I need to write the next episode, polish it, and get it published. No, I finished it now, and I thought there'll be a lot of people coming out of Nano, which I didn't do, but it was sort of a good time to talk about that. And so yeah, the big thing I've been doing this week since I finished is trying to declutter my head of the urge to write another episode of Seven Stones. And to go, well, actually, I know what the next arc is going to be, so maybe I could just start planning. You're going, no, you promised yourself to take a break from it. You wanted to take a break. You're not allowed to touch that until next year.
I was the same when I stopped bitter end. Like I said, so I've always said, like, you need a X number of books. Don't write forever. So after the 6th book, I was like, oh, but couldn't I write about? Oh no,
yeah.
I could.
I guess yeah. So I've been going through the revised version of Sorcery, 3rd volume of Dragons and Magic, the thing I'm writing with Simon, and so I've finished reading through that. So it's up to a polish and then get that published.
Yep.
So that's been me since last time.
On my side, I read through Hard Vacuum because I'm preparing to write. As I mentioned last week, you weren't here, Dave, but on the survey of my readers, military science fiction far outweighs sword and sorcery by more than double. And when I look at the sales for the Kairos Iron series, the Hard Vacuum series, it's got a far better sell-through to the sequels than the other books do. So really, I've been bringing out one Kairos Iron book a year, usually around January time. But I should kind of push that up the priority list. So then my whole plan of, I'll write a sword and sorcery series went out the window because 2/3 of my readers want military sci-fi and have joined my list because they like Kairos Iron stuff. That even though I have lots of, presumably 1/3 of my list is then sword and sorcery fans, they've got the Dragons and Magic series to keep them going. So I should kind of, I guess, work on the military sci-fi and get that up. Which as well is a good excuse because I've got a military sci-fi book that I've really wanted to write for a long time, like years. And I've been putting off because I've been saying, I need to do this and I need to do that. So once Kairos Iron is then finished off, then I'll work on that. That's probably the whole year will be military sci-fi. Which is fine. Like, I like military sci-fi, so that's grand. So I read Hard Vacuum. and I enjoyed it, but then I enjoy my writing. Some people hate their own writing, and I love my own writing. So, like, I write exactly what I want to read. So then when I go back and read, I'm going, this is awesome. So the only thing I fixed was I took out a lot of the kairas. So I mentioned on a previous podcast that if something's in third person and you use the character's name too much, every time you use it, you're distancing the reader away from the character, where you want the reader to be the main character essentially in their heads. So where it's not necessary, you can cut out the name. Obviously, if you have to, so where it gets complicated is Kyra's female, obviously, and when she's talking to Jolin or any of her other female friends, then you have to use the name, because you can't just say she, because then who do you mean? Or even in conversation generally, even when she's talking to a man, it felt a little bit weird to say she said, he said, she said, he said, so I put some names in there. But anyway, yeah, so I read that, and I read the first 4 chapters of the next book, and also I took everything off Smashwords, Kobo, all the rest of it, and I put everything except for the first 2 episodes of each series on Select. So all the 3rd episode up in every series is now KDP Select. The reason the others aren't is because they're on my mailing list. So the mailing list gets them for free. If they weren't that, so really what I need is a reader magnet that's exclusive to the mailing list for each series. That I reckon should be, from my experience, should be about 20,000 words. Because a short novella, is long enough that people don't feel like, oh, this is just a short story, it's not worth it. But short enough that I can write it pretty quickly. So I'm considering potentially writing a novella in a bunch of series, like 1 novella in each, and making that the reader magnet for the mailing list, and then making everything KDP Select other than that, and that won't be available anywhere else. So it's sign up to the mailing list or don't ever get it. Which Ed even mentioned last week, just after the podcast, that would be perfect for Dragons and Magic if we revealed what the hidden statistic was in a novella on our just available to our mailing list. Then anyone who's wondering about that, who's reading Dragons and Magic, would then sign up to the mailing list just to find out. And some people would sign up, download it, and then leave, but that's fine. But it would get kind of a high sign-up rate, potentially, for not a massive cost. Like, the shorter a book gets, at least from my experience, the shorter a book gets, it gets incrementally less time, because there's less story elements to keep track of. And like, a short story takes me about 4 hours total, whereas a novel would take me 60 hours total, even though it's so a short story says 5,000 words, a novel 60,000. It should take less time than it does, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Other than that, yeah, I've been sucked into coding because I discovered a new technology. So one thing I've realized is that I like coding, because I keep having a choice. Both are creative, writing and coding are creative, and I keep getting sucked into coding things above writing. So I've said that I'm going to work on my website the rest of the year and then write something. So I'm going to kind of keep to that, but coding keeps calling to me when I'm trying to be world building. So it kind of, the subject this week sits perfectly. When is it okay not to write? So you suggested the topic, Dave. Do you want to go first?
I did actually. I'm actually triggered by an Ursula K. Le Guin quote from a letter she wrote to someone, which is, don't try to go against the flow, to work when work seems futile. Let it be. Let the block stay uncarved or the word be unwritten until it wants to take shape to speak. What nobody teaches anymore is how not to act, not to keep busy, how to wait. My guess is you need to be still while your strength is gathering, and when it has gathered, you will know the direction you need to go, and you'll go there. So, coming out of Nano, the first year, certainly I felt very odd not writing. And I finished Nano early, in that I'd hit the 50,000 words before the end of the month. And so that left me with well, do I carry on writing for the rest of the month or do I not? And then hit the end of November and the 1st of December, you get a lot of people talking about publishing their manuscript, but you don't get a lot of people talking about writing the manuscript anymore. Because all of the people who do it every year are wherever they go, and people who want to publish are talking about publishing, and the community sort of fizzled away. So I was left with a double whammy there the first year. And then coming out of 7 Stones, it's even harder because that's been 97 episodes. So it was all about when is it okay not to write? I think you have to force a break sometimes. Where's that part of you that knows you're stale or knows it's not working? Where it's not the sort of the writer's block of getting up, looking at a blank page and then checking your email and then checking Facebook. It's actually that the ideas aren't coming. You know that you're getting tired of this idea. And so it's how to make yourself stop. So my approach usually is to have more than one project on the go. So for 7 Stones, I got over wanting to write it by looking at sorcery. And then once I'd finished sorcery, I put sorcery aside and went, well, I'll let that mull for a bit just so I'm sure that I like the changes before I come back to it. And went, well, I've got a short story to do for later this month, so I'll do that. And then I'd go back to sorcery again, leave the short story to mull so I can fix it. So that sort of copes with it for my process. But also I have been doing less deliberately. I've been doing other productive things. Because usually I'd write an episode of 7 Stones and I'd do some other writing. But now I've only been working on one thing at a time without the 7 Stones running in parallel to it. So I think my key to accepting that it was okay not to be writing a weekly serial and doing all of the writing on other things was to be doing something else that's useful, productive, that I could say isn't just slacking. Because whilst there is absolutely no difference in terms of my career progression between cleaning grout and reading a book, potentially reading the book is even more useful for writing than cleaning grout. If I sat on the sofa with a cat and read a book instead of writing 7 Stones, that I think would niggle at me because I'd feel like I was relaxing when I should be working. If I'm rubbing away at grout with a brush and some soap, it feels like working. So that's okay by my brain, even if it isn't writing working.
Just reminding me of Connor and Raina.
Yeah, that's true. They liked cleaning.
Yeah.
I'm less.
A little too much, maybe.
Yeah, possibly.
I think the worry is loss of momentum. I was listening to Joe Rogan earlier, and he was saying that a lot of people who are very motivated don't even want to take, a Sunday off or anything, because they're worried about loss of momentum, because there is a lot to it where if you're getting up and doing a certain amount of work, you've gotten used to doing that amount of work, and you feel like, yeah, well, of course I want to sit and play with the cat or watch TV or whatever it happens to be. And you worry that, I think all of us tend to have been that person before, like the unmotivated person who will sit and watch TV all evening. And maybe the worry is, well, I don't want to go back to being that person, because then I'm never going to accomplish anything. I'm just going to get to my deathbed and have watched a lot of TV. So I think the worry is there, but at the same time, you can't just work all the time, or eventually you'll go crazy, because the human mind needs to have some outlet that's not stressful and work related.
Yeah.
No matter how fun the work is.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned before, there's like the 40% rule. Did I talk about that before? Yeah. So the short version is that the US Marines say that when you feel like you're absolutely exhausted and you need to give up, then you've used about 40% of your resources. So if you keep going, you can get to 100%. You don't have to give up. They use it mostly for like exercise and stuff. So anyway, so my point being that most people feel like at the end of a day in work, like their day job, that they're exhausted and they can't possibly cope with anything else. And I reckon that's probably about 40% of what they could potentially cope with.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's about worrying that you're going to slip back into being just one of those people who doesn't accomplish anything. We got a comment.
A comment?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Someone said, "Hey, how to write a novel," which might be a bit too much of a subject to go into, but hello to our viewer.
Start at the end, work backwards.
Yeah, I think started our videos from number 1, because we went through every step. So episode 1 kind of is about the first thing to do, and then episode 2 and so on. So yeah, so what I was going to say was, I think you're right, it's about motivation, but I have a very different process to you, where I work better if I'm concentrating on one thing. So if I try and concentrate on 2 things, I don't have I think I've talked about it before, like I always think that if my brain was a computer, I would not have very much RAM. That holding all those things in my head is too much for 2 books. I can hold one book, one world in my head, but I can't hold 2. So, and if I leave it too long, like with Kairos Iron, because it's been a year, I have to read the previous books, because I've lost, like, I don't remember all the stuff that's happened. Like I was reading my notes, I knew this was going to happen, so I left notes to myself about the end of book 3, what the situation was. It still wasn't enough. I still have to read the other books, even with the notes, to say, hey, this dude has done this, and this person's done this, and maybe this could be an idea for the next book. It's not enough to kind of get me into the world. So yeah, so what I was going to say was the thing I think when it's definitely okay to take a break is what you say, when you're exhausted, when your resources are used up. There's no point in pushing. Like a lot of people will say that they're writing or editing and they start to misspell very common words. Well, that's a kind of a sign to stop. If you can't spell the word "the" anymore, then you've written enough for the day. And on the same level, if in general on a book, if you're not able to discern what the best course of action is next for the characters or whatever, it's the same thing. I think as well, it's about having other interests other than writing, because you can't exactly write just books about writing either. And it doesn't have to be, you know, traveling the world or anything. As you mentioned, working on grout has worked its way into our books.
Yeah.
Like, or, you know, playing with the cat or whatever. Green Star also has a giant cat. So you need to have other things in your life other than writing books, even though time is fairly limited. If you're working a day job and you're writing books, there's not all that much else to do. I mean, a lot of people say if you want to be a writer, you should be a reader. You should be reading massive amounts of books. And that's fine. Obviously, you know, you should learn what other people have done. But you also have to experience the world yourself. The worst thing, one thing that gets mentioned a lot is James Bond Ian Fleming made up a lot of BS and put them into the Bond books, and people read those books and think, oh, that's how it actually works. But it's like the skin suffocation is the most famous example. So anyone that didn't know any better might go and write their book and put in skin suffocation. Your skin can't suffocate. Your lungs can suffocate. Your skin can't suffocate. So you need to kind of be out in the world and experiencing things and learning and figuring things out for yourself. So yeah, I would say training as well is an important part of it, because if you're just writing is great practice, but you also need to work out what you're weakest at and train on it in the most effective way possible. And that's not necessarily writing another book, because if you're working, say you're bad at dialogue, if you're writing an entire book, only 25% of the book is dialogue, and you're also trying to get through the story, and that's all taking up all of your brain at the time. So that's not necessarily working just on improving your dialogue, because you wanted to get it to a stage where it's automatically better. You shouldn't have to concentrate in order to write dialogue, because you're trying to work on the story at the same time. So in that case, if you were poor at dialogue, you might be better off taking a month-long break where you just wrote dialogue scenes, and you came up with, a lot of different scenarios. Also looked at the people who are the best at dialogue and maybe rewrote their dialogue or analyzed it in more of a, like, if you just read their books, that's one thing. If you took their dialogue and analyzed it and tried to break down why it's better, or watch, courses, or speak to teachers or groups or whatever, and figure out why the dialogue is better, that could certainly be beneficial as well as a break. Did you have more thoughts on it, Dave?
Well, I think there's a wider point there, that it's okay to not be writing when you're doing the bits that aren't writing. And that includes quite a few things that don't necessarily seem, even to you, like productive things. Because when you're actually writing, physically editing, there is a tangible thing you are doing that is writing related. If someone walks into the room, they can see you're typing on a keyboard or scrolling on a piece of paper or whatever. But unless you have utterly rigid mental control, in which case probably you're not going to need any advice on when to be not doing and not doing things. If you get up from your desk and go for a stroll, you're still thinking about the story. So it's also okay to not be writing when you're letting your mind mull things over. So it's okay to not be writing if you hit a block in the story at 2:30 when you were planning on writing till 3. It's fine to get up and spend that half an hour doing something else. And that can apply to bigger amounts of time as well. Obviously, as you say, you don't want to lose momentum. So potentially putting a manuscript down halfway through and not coming back to it for months doesn't work. But if you get stuck on the end of your story and put it aside for a couple of weeks, you're still probably turning that over in the back of your mind productively. So you're going to come out potentially with an ending that now works. And in the long run, those 2 weeks of not doing anything that's tangibly and visibly and objectively writing will save you more than 2 weeks of time when it comes to fixing the story after your beta readers have gone, well, I loved it up until the ending.
Yeah. I mean, we mention him on practically every podcast now, but Chris Fox talks about this as well, where he writes in writing sprints, not in long periods of time, where he will write for 15 minutes and then stop for 10 or 15 or whatever it happens to be, and then write for 15 minutes and then stop. And the reason he does that is because he feels when there's a time pressure, he'll write it faster. And then he has those, like say if we were writing, we would write slower and take the whole half an hour just on those words, whereas he gets them done in 15 and then gets something else done in the other 15. Maybe he goes off and answers an email or whatever he happens to do. So there's that as well. There's taking deliberate breaks in order to speed up your writing sessions and make them more productive. And he writes, 5,000 words a day or whatever happens to be. So he's not losing massive amounts of words by shortening the amount of time he takes.
Yeah.
Was there anything else then?
I think so. No.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that's the end of my list of burblings and merblings.
One thing I wanted to mention off subject at the end was the fact that 50% of our adventure sales are coming from KDP Select. So I thought that might be useful for people to know that page reads are a substantial reason why it's keeping reasonably high up in the charts, because they count as a full sale every time there's a full amount of pages read. So I thought that was worth mentioning, that Select, there's a lot of pros and cons and people have debated it back and forth, but at the moment there's just more readers on Select than there is, at least for in my experience and our joint experience, that Smashwords and iTunes and Kobo and all the rest of them combined don't come close to the amount of readers we get by being Select. So that was just something I wanted to mention at the end, in case people are debating. I think it's worth like, far be it from me to dictate to anyone, and everyone can make their own decisions. But I think it's worth a 3-month experiment, especially if you're in the same position we've been in, where you get like the Smashwords report and it's 1 sale for the entire month or 0 sales for the entire month. Well, then you're not exactly losing anything by trying it out for 3 months, other than the whole principle of being wide rather than giving Amazon a monopoly. But Amazon is so massive, I don't think they really care if some indie author is not exclusive to their platform. They do care on a macro level, but each individual author is not necessarily making a difference. So it's the same reason why I mentioned earlier that everything I have is now select, other than the ones that are for my mailing list, because they can't be both. They can't be on the mailing list and in select. Grant. Sorry. So we will leave it there. Thank you all very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Bye for now.